safety.
The kind of place where stranger danger feels like something you read about, not something you live.
Totally. And into this picture comes Mr. Holloway. That's not his real name, obviously, but he's the key figure here. He was a school bus driver.
Someone seeing these kids every day. Twice a day, actually, morning and afternoon.
Yeah, some parents are trusting with their children's safety day in, day out, especially in a town like that where maybe you let your guard down a bit.
Which brings us right to the core question, doesn't it? How does someone with a, let's say, troubling background end up driving that bus?
That's what we need to unpack.
Okay, so let's paint a picture of this Mr. Holloway, at least how people saw him initially. Mid-40s, starting to go bald. People described him as kind, soft-spoken.
He'd wave to neighbors, apparently. It just seemed like a regular, maybe slightly unremarkable guy, blended in.
Pretty much the definition of unremarkable, which, in hindsight.
Yeah, it makes it worse, because the reality was just 3 months, literally 3 months before he got that job driving the bus, he'd been released from a psychiatric facility.
And here's the first big crack we see in this system, a really significant one. Because of how the laws work, how privacy is handled. They'd stay in a mental health institution. It just didn't show up on the standard background checks the school district ran.
So as far as they knew, clean record, nothing to worry about.
Exactly. A blank slate. It really highlights that tension, privacy versus safety, especially when kids are involved.
It's a really uncomfortable thought that this whole other history was just invisible, hidden.
And the first signs, they were subtle, easy to dismiss maybe.
Right. Like parents started noticing the bus routes seemed to be taking a bit longer than they should.
Or he'd linger at certain stops for, maybe a little too long. Small thing.
Things you might not even connect at first. Just odd.
But then you look back and these little details suddenly seem, well, ominous, don't they?
Definitely. And then there were the questions he started asking the kids. Again, maybe you could try to rationalize them, but they feel off.
What kind of questions?
Things like, do your parents work late? Or do you like having your picture taken? Just probing, a little too personal. And there was this one incident with a 10-year-old girl. He apparently offered her $5 to pose for a picture right there in front of her house.
Okay, that's crossing a line. That's not just quirky anymore. That's a professional boundary completely ignored.
You'd think that would be a huge red flag right there.
It should have been, absolutely.
Yeah.
But the behavior, it didn't stop there. It escalated.
Yeah, parents then started seeing him outside their houses on weekends, in his own car parked down the street, just watching.
Watching the houses.
Yeah, and when one parent, understandably freaked out, went out and confronted him, his response was just deeply unsettling.
What did he say?
He just smiled, apparently, and said, just making sure the kids are safe.
Oh, that's manipulative, using the language of safety to cover up something creepy.
It's incredibly disturbing. And then there was the envelope.
Oh, no, envelope.
The same parent who confronted him found an envelope in their mailbox. No return address. Inside, 5 candid photos of their daughter.
No.
Yeah. Walking to the bus, walking home from the bus, just pictures. No note, nothing. Just the photos.
That's moved way beyond just watching. That's targeted. That's an act of intimidation, almost, or obsession.
It's terrifying. So you'd think now the school district would act, right? With all this mounting.
You would hope so. What do?
Initially, not enough. They basically dismissed the concerns, said there wasn't enough evidence to fire him.
Evidence of what? What were they waiting for?
Exactly. They apparently called him quirky, said he hadn't, physically touched anyone, as if that's the only line that matters.
That's a failure right there. Waiting for physical harm is...
Well, it's waiting too long. The pattern was clear. The risk was clear.
Well, thankfully, some of the parents weren't having it. They decided they had to dig deeper themselves.
They started their own investigation. Yeah. And through, I think, a personal connection, someone knew someone, they found out about the institutionalization.
Psychiatric facility stay.
Right. And not just any stay. He'd been treated for severe bipolar disorder with psychotic features.
Okay, so that involves potentially, like, delusions, a break from reality.
Yes, and crucially, the records mentioned past obsessive delusions, specifically involving children.
Oh, wow. So this wasn't new behavior necessarily. This was a pattern.
A deeply concerning pattern. And this information, the really critical stuff, it wasn't on any standard check. The parents had to find it themselves.
And then they managed to get a court order.
Right.
To see his old case file.
They did. And the details in there, they're just horrific. There was this incident at a daycare center, before he was a bus driver, obviously.
What happened?
He broke in at night and he mutilated the toy. As like broke the arms and legs off dolls and figures.
Oh my God.
And then he staged them, arranged them in some kind of disturbing family dinner scene.
That's chilling. The symbolism of that, the targeted destruction, it paints a really dark picture.
Incredibly dark. But here's the kicker. Despite that incident, no criminal charges were filed against him.
None. How is that possible?
It was treated purely as a mental health crisis. He got a psychiatric hold, treatment, but no criminal record came out of it.
So, again, from an employment background check perspective, nothing shows up.
Yeah.
That whole horrific event is invisible to the system.
Exactly. It really shows the limits of just relying on criminal records, doesn't it? When you're dealing with potentially dangerous behavior rooted in mental health issues.
And the system prioritized the lack of charges over the actual documented behavior.
And adding another layer to this, the records also suggested Holloway had kind of learned to work the system.
What do you...
Like he'd learned what to say and when to say it within the mental health system to get released. He knew how to present himself as stable, even if maybe he wasn't.
So he could potentially mask the underlying problems. That adds a whole other level of concern. He wasn't just unwell, he might have been manipulative too.
It certainly seems possible. And even with parents bringing this information forward, the school district still seemed slow to react. It took more incidents.
More. After all that.
Yeah. One mother came home, found her back door unlocked. Nothing seemed stolen, but a kitchen chair had been moved, muddy footprints inside.
Yeah.
Her young son said he'd seen Mr. Holloway hanging around outside the house the night before.
Trespassing. Inside the house.
Well, the police were called, but because there was no sign of forced entry and nothing taken, they basically just gave Holloway a warning. Another technicality.
But for that family, the feeling of violation must have been intense, knowing he might have been inside.
Unimaginable. And around this time, people noticed Holloway changed a bit. He stopped the friendly waves to neighbors.
Pulling back. Maybe he knew he was being watched more closely.
Could be, like a tactical shift. But then came the final straw, the thing that finally forced the issue.
What was it?
A teacher found a child hiding under the backseat of the bus. After everyone else had gotten off, the child was crying, terrified.
Oh, no, that poor kid.
And the child told them what happened. Holloway had kept her behind, told her she had a special smile, asked her to stay after the others left.
Okay.
Then he shut the bus doors, walked slowly down the aisle towards her, and just stared at her intensely. Didn't say anything more, just scared.
That's psychological torment for a child. Alone on a bus with this adult. The power imbalance, the fear.
She started sobbing uncontrollably, and only then did he finally open the doors and let her go.
Thank goodness he let her go. But the damage.
That was it. The parents banded together properly this time. They went to the school, they went to the media, demanded action.
And finally.
Finally, yes, he was fired. Quietly, but fired.
Was he arrested?
Yeah.
Charged with anything related to that incident?
No, still no arrest. And after he was fired, he just disappeared. Vanished from the town.
And nobody knows where he is now.
As far as the sources say, no. His current whereabouts are unknown.
And the chilling part is that legal technicality hangs over it all, doesn't it?
Yeah. He didn't technically break any laws. He didn't physically harm anyone. That's the official line, perhaps.
But the harm was absolutely real. The psychological harm to those kids, the fear instilled in the families, the shattering of trust in that community, those are real scars.
Absolutely. The lack of physical marks doesn't mean no one was hurt. Far from it.
And then there's that final sort of haunting detail from the story.
Right. The occasional reports, sightings
Yeah.
of a man in an old car near the school bus depot, early in the morning on cold days, just sitting there, watching, waiting.
Is it him? Maybe, maybe not. But the idea of it, the possibility, that's enough to keep that fear alive, isn't it? That constant sense of unease.
It really drives home the point, doesn't it? Some monsters, they don't need blood or violence to be utterly terrifying. Sometimes the scariest thing is knowing how close they got, how easily the system failed.
Yeah. This whole case, this deep dive, it really throws a harsh light on some serious vulnerabilities, doesn't it? I mean, first, that huge loophole in the background checks regarding mental health stays.
Yeah.
That's critical.
Definitely. Then there's the school district's reluctance, their initial hesitation to act on a clear pattern of disturbing behavior just because it wasn't, technically criminal yet.
Right. Waiting for something worse to happen. And I suppose the limits of the legal system itself in dealing with potential threats before someone gets physically hurt.
So when you take all that in, this whole unsettling story,
Hmm.
it really forces you to ask some tough questions, doesn't it?
It does. Like, what other unseen vulnerabilities are lurking in the systems we depend on every day? The ones we trust with our kids, our families.
And how do we even begin to balance things like individual rights and privacy versus the need for community safety, especially for the most vulnerable? It's such a hard line to draw.
It really is. It makes you think, what are the broader lessons here? How could vetting processes be better? Should they include more comprehensive history, like mental health, where it's relevant and legally okay?
And how do we empower authorities, or maybe just encourage them, to take patterns of disturbing behavior more seriously, even if no law has technically been broken yet? Proactive versus reactive.
Yeah, and just for us as community members, how do we stay vigilant? How do we look out for each other and for kids without just creating a culture of fear?
Yeah.
It's about finding that balance, keeping kids' safety absolutely paramount,